Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of Attlas Information Live. We usually like to give a few minutes for some people to shuffle in as we prepare to launch into tonight's topic, which is one which, again, we were inspired to pursue based on events and based on a recent conversation that we had regarding the single greatest obstacle that individuals face, and indeed humanity faces, in terms of practical development and practical acquisition of knowledge, of real conscious knowledge, objective knowledge. And that obstacle is the mind itself. And tonight, we will go through a step-by-step process which will reveal some of the ways in which the mind enslaves us, hypnotizes us. And by us, we mean the consciousness. Our consciousness becomes fascinated, becomes entrenched, identified, and attached to that which the mind conjures for us. So, as this is a crucial and important topic, we will hold off on launching into our presentation, which we have prepared for this evening, until a few more people arrive. At the moment, we can see, according to StreamYards here, we have not many viewers. So, and according to this, one of the viewers is us. So if you are out there, and by all means, check in with us and announce yourself, say hello, so we know you're there. Otherwise, there's not much point in us holding this live stream, is there? So the mind is a powerful tool. It's a powerful tool when it's in the hand of our true self, our innermost being. But in the hands of our many egos, the mind is a prison. Because just as it's a tool for truth in the hand of our innermost being, our true self, it can be a tool for truth. It can reflect truth. But just like any tool when it's abused or misused or appropriated by malevolent forces, that tool, as useful as it is under normal circumstances, can be turned into a powerful weapon. And that weapon can be used to bludgeon us and make us lose consciousness. And the mind is exactly such a tool. Like a baseball bat, which under normal circumstances we use to play a game and enjoy ourselves and participate with others. But in the hands of someone who's malevolent, whose only goal is to enslave us and abuse us, a baseball bat can knock us out and worse. The same can be said for a hammer. The same can be said for any number of tools. Any number of tools can be very valuable and powerful when used in the right way. But if they're abused and misused, they become a tool for the adversary, those who would imprison us. And that's exactly the case with our mind. And tonight we're going to go over some of that, and go over some of that in some practical ways. So we've prepared a bit of a presentation for this evening, and we're going to walk through this presentation. There's 5 or so of you out there, so we may as well launch into it. We've built the presentation such that if we have to, we can go back and review any section or a specific area. So there might be some jumping around a bit, especially if more people show up and they miss the beginning. We might have to jump back and review some stuff, but we'll see how that goes over the course of the evening. Our screen real estate is in a bit of a premium when we do these sorts of presentations live. We're trying to juggle the presentation itself, and then the controls for the presentation, and then the live stream, etc. So it leaves us very little real estate on the screens, but by all means, do post comments. We will be monitoring them. And if at all possible, we'll stop and address any issues or comments or questions that that anyone has. So let's see how it goes, and we will. Yeah, let's see how that goes. All right then. The brief overview of tonight's talk will be structured as follows. We will look into the nature of mind. We will look at the nature of consciousness. And then we will look at problems with the mind, and then practical ways of solving or overcoming those problems and ultimately mastering the mind, which is the point of this live stream and the reason we presume why you're here. And we would hope that you recognize, as we're going through this, the serious nature of this particular topic, and how very few people seriously approach the observation and reconciliation of their own mind, the mastery of their own mind. Most people are slaves to their mind, and you probably are aware of that, and you might yourself feel that way at times. And so our goal tonight is to give you some practical guidance to help flesh out and provide meaningful practices that you can do to help get you to where we want to be in relationship with our mind, which is ultimately mastery. So let's begin then with the first section, which is, of course, looking at the nature of the mind. Now, this is a gobbledygook slide filled with a bunch of words, and the center is an image or a makeshift image of a CPU, or a central processing unit. This is a very illustrative suggestion of what the mind is, while it's attempting to relay the central allegory that we're going to use in analyzing the nature of the mind. So there's lots of words on here. We're not going to go through them because they're not important. The important ones are central processing unit, because that's what the mind is. But we need to understand a little bit better what that means. Well, a central processing unit fetches instructions from memory. It decodes those instructions into its binary language. It executes an action, and it moves on to the next step. And then it writes output to memory or otherwise. It'll send, well, the CPU sends it to memory, and then memory will send it to other places. So for example, the computer screen or the printer or wherever. So that's in computer terms. The input and output, an operating system, or I/O and OS, functions more or less like this. Inputs come into the CPU, it processes, and it produces outputs. But the CPU operates on top of an operating system. And that operating system is what allows programs to be installed and run on that system. And those programs create inputs and process outputs. So there's multi-layers to this. And the goal here is to point out that we have a hardware component, which is the central processing unit. And we have a system software component, which is the operating system and the binary programming system of the CPU itself, the binary language with which the central processing unit processes. And then we have our application software level, which are the programs that are installed and put into the operating system. The important thing about all of this is that this system is completely binary. Not only does it function on the foundation as ones and zeros, but inputs and outputs, it's on or off, yes or no. That binary system relates directly to our dialectic mind. There's a reason why we created computers the way we did, with on and off, ones and zeros, input, output. And that's because, and our programming languages in software, if God created man in his own image, man created computers in his own image. And that image is binary, dialectic, intellectual, rational, reasoning mind. The mind, the monkey mind, the mechanical mind, is an electrochemical computer in that crude expression. So we have just as we have, you know, ones and zeros, right, on and off, we have in our binary dialectic mind what we want and what we don't want. Just as we have inputs and outputs, we have in the mind desires to consume and desires to purge. We have what a computer can compute and what it cannot compute, what returns as an error. And then in the mind, we have what we believe and what we deny. Computers think in terms of this or that. And of course, we know all too well that individuals and groups think in terms of not only this and that, but me and you and us and them. And then we have the basic if-then statement of binary computer language. If this, then that. If X, then Y. And that translates in the dialectic mind into rationalization, intellectual reasoning, which is, as you can see, with its relationship to computers, is ultimately cold and calculating and heartless. Rationalization doesn't take anything into account but what it deems to be important in its own computational analysis. If something, then something else. It's a precipitous type of process. So then we can look at the mind then in the same way as receiving inputs and functioning its process and producing outputs. And it has its own operating system that we call intellectualism or deductive reasoning. And into that operating system are plugged all of these different programs. We have our beliefs, our concepts, theories, assumptions, dogma, and errors. That is, that which we think or believe that are wrong, our wrong thinking, which also very neatly plugs into that operating system, just like everything else, because there is nothing discernibly different between a belief, a concept, a theory, an assumption, dogma, or an error. Functionally, they are all programs, and functionally, they operate and work in the operating system just fine, and the mind processes them just fine, as long as they're in the language that the mind understands. The mind can work with them, and the mind does work with them, because how many people do we know who operate on wrong think? So there at the top we have the brain, and then we have subconscious thinking. That's all the processing that the brain or the mind does unbeknownst to us. And then we have what we would call conditioned thinking, those beliefs, concepts, theories that we have adopted or assumed or have been given or have been imprinted on us over the years. And then we have what we call here the conscious thinking component of it, which is the actual process of doing deductive reasoning or intellectualizing with the mind itself as the instrument. And we can do that consciously. For example, if we're solving a math problem, or if we're trying to work something out, we can consciously be using our mind as the instrument, as the tool in thinking. And we do this all the time. And one of the interesting aspects of the mind, of course, is that thinking often deals with either the past or the future. We're thinking about stuff that we've done, or we're thinking about stuff that we have yet to do. How should we do it? When should we do it? Why should we do it? Should we do it? Yes or no? And we're trying to work it all out. And we're working it out. We're working out the in the operating system of deductive reasoning using various programs that we have installed in that and then the subconscious thinking that's going on without our knowledge is constantly going on, and it's just going on and going on and going on. In fact, if we observe ourselves, we can notice that the mind is very often just chattering away, and things are coming up to the surface because the subconscious thinking is always happening. So things are being spat out in the output, and they're showing up in the operating system into what we call our conscious awareness. So in other words, the computer operates precisely like our brain, our mind operates. And this we call the dialectic. Again, 1, 0, yes, no, on, off, me, you, us, them. And the mind, using that on and off dialectic, really can only compare things. It can do pattern recognition, it can do other things, but then it only compares A to B to C, and then it makes some sort of value judgment based on some kind of quantitative analysis and some sort of qualitative analysis, which very often occurs in the subconscious mind that we're not aware of. So the interesting thing, however, is when we look at hardware, software, and the user in the realm of computers, and remember, we're using this analogy because God created man in his own image, and we created computers in our own image. So if we compare the two systems, over here we have hardware that runs software, and it's operated by a user. seems straightforward enough. So over on the other side, we have what we think of as hardware, the brain. We have what we think of as software, the mind, all those thoughts and calculations and operations which are occurring in or on or with the assistance of the brain. But then, where is the user? Who is the user? What is the user? If we are our mind, we are our thoughts, and if this brain is who and what we are, then where is the user? This is what is called the hard question in science. And that this model of the mind cannot produce consciousness. This model of the mind cannot scientifically demonstrate that consciousness even exists. How does something so mechanical and so material as the brain produce something so ephemeral and subtle as the consciousness and basically self-awareness? Now, science fiction has postulated that if you create a sophisticated enough computer, that it will become self-aware, and that consciousness is this some sort of emergent phenomenon that emerges out of the materialist reality, given enough computational complexity. And there are more than a few software engineers and artificial intelligence scientists working on achieving just that as we speak. They believe that if they can only increase the number of calculations done per second, that they can produce consciousness out of an unconscious machine. Well, let us then continue then by looking at the nature of consciousness itself. That's just a brief overview of the mind, but it's important to get us to the place where we have to say, well, consciousness doesn't emerge from a machine. Let's look at the user software hardware from a different point of view. Here we have our user, the being, or what we're calling here the player. And we're using a very specific analogy here that you will recognize fairly quickly. The software is the consciousness. And the so-called hardware, or the mortal vehicle, is what we're referring to as the character in the game world. That's why hardware is in quotation marks, because this reality that we experience doesn't exist outside of the mind. Everything that we experience is experienced inside of mind. And Immanuel Kant referred to all this as the phenomenon versus the noumenon. The noumenon meaning the thing in itself. There is nothing out in the world that actually is what we believe it to be. There is no color, right? Everything is vibration, everything is frequency, everything is electric. There is no matter. Matter doesn't exist. There is the illusion of matter. And the fact that science has yet to accept this, and they have something called the CERN collider that is trying to identify, these particles, these subatomic particles, these quanta and everything else, is just testimony to the fact that we have been wrong thinking our relationship, because we have been trying to continue the model that we already have. But so from our point of view, the mortal vehicle, the character in the game world, from our perspective, it consists of hardware and software. And it consists of 3 hardware brains: the mind, the brain, the heart, and the physical body. And there are 5 centers of operation in those 3 brains: the intellectual, emotional, and motor instinctive sexual centers. But from our point of view, right, this is an issue coming at it from our point of view, if we fail to recognize that hardware is all virtual. And that leads us into the next section, which is problems with the mind. So let us look at the multidimensional self from the mind's point of view. Again, the mind thinks that it has a brain, right? Hardware, and that brain runs software. And the user, the mind has an answer for that. The mind says, I am the user. That's ego. And the result of this is that the consciousness is asleep. It's not a hard question of materialist science. It's an impossible question for the materialist scientific mind. The materialist scientific mind cannot arrive at the truth and nature of ego so long as it functions from this paradigm. If it functions from this paradigm, from the mind's point of view, it is consciousness, and consciousness comes from the brain. And as we explained, as we see, AI scientists and programmers into artificial intelligence are attempting to prove that. They're attempting to create consciousness in computers, in these supercomputers. And because they're trying to do that, because they don't understand the actual relationship, they don't understand the true nature of the multidimensional self, they will never arrive at the truth and nature of consciousness. So let's look at that multidimensional self in terms of the esoteric physiognomy of the multidimensional bodies of a human being. So obviously, at the base, at the bottom, we have the physical body in the 3-dimensional reality that we all are easily identified with and that we all can easily verify. The foundation of that physical body in the 4th dimension is the vital body. That's the body of chi, the body of prana, the body of the sexual force. Next, we have the astral body and the mental body, which combine in the 5th dimension to form what we collectively refer to as the astral body. But we refer to it as the astral body simply because it constitutes one dimension or one level, but it's really made up of 2 bodies: the astral or emotional body, and then the mental body. Next, we have the causal body, the Buddhic body, and the Atmic body. Now, the causal body is also known as the human soul. The Buddhic body is the divine soul, and the Atmic body is our innermost being. These are in the 6th dimension. And we'll get to that in just one moment. So clearly, the brain exists in the physical body. The mind exists here in the fifth dimension, in the mental body. And the consciousness exists here in the Buddhic body, the divine soul. The consciousness is between the innermost being and the human soul. It is the operating system whereby the player interacts with the character through that OS, that operating system of consciousness. But we can see here then that these are the four bodies of sin, or they're called, or they have been called, the four bodies of sin, or the four bodies of desire. They are also referred to as the false self. This is the character in the game world that we identify with. It's lunar and it's mechanical. And the reason why it's lunar and mechanical is because it self-identifies as the I, as the ego, because that's what the mind generates. From the false point of view that the physical body and the brain is the foundation and mind is software that runs on the hardware, the only answer that it can produce is I, me. I am my own thing. I am self-aware. But over here in the sixth dimension is the monad, or the lower trinity. This is our true self. This is the player. This is where our consciousness resides. These three bodies constitute the monad. This is the trinity, three as one. And so you can see there's a disconnect between these two. And the disconnect is that the lunar mechanical mind leads to lunar subconsciousness, enslavement of the consciousness to a lunar mechanical subconscious state. This is what we call being asleep. The consciousness falls asleep. We lose conscious awareness of our true self. We become identified with our egos, with our eyes, and we become completely identified with the four bodies of sin and the false self, and we are cut off. Our consciousness, we're cut off from our monad because our consciousness is bottled up inside of the egos and becomes lunar, becomes subconscious. But through the process of ego death, we can reduce the influence of the egos on ourselves. And through the creation of the solar bodies, which is a process of alchemy, the transformation of subconsciousness into free consciousness, we can make a shift. And create the solar causal body leads to a solar conscious mind. A mind which is connected consciously to the consciousness, to the Buddhic divine soul, the Buddhic body. And that connection is solar. Once the solar causal body is created, then the entrapment by the egos can be replaced with a solar conscious relationship between the mind and the brain. This is what we call being awake. Someone who is awake is aware and conscious of this. They know themselves. And for them, this is merely a vessel. And even though this relationship, this process of shifting one's consciousness from the vessel, from identification with the vessel and the physical body, to an awareness, an awake state, where the emotions and the mental body can reflect the consciousness and reflect the truth and receive solar guidance, because they're solar in nature. So instead of being identified and trapped with what's mechanical, they can be connected and one with that which is divine. Through a continued process of ego death and even less influence of the egos, and through the creation of our solar Buddhic body and solar Atmic body, the next level is mastery. This is what it means to be a master. We have our solar vital body, astral body, mental body, causal body, Buddhic body, and Atmic body, and they're all solar. This is what it means to be a master. And the influence of the egos is very, very, very low indeed. It's not entirely eliminated, though. To entirely eliminate the egos requires another step, and we won't get into that tonight. But remember, there's levels and levels and levels to this. This is more than enough to occupy us and keep us busy. And even, for myself, for ourselves, we are in formation, right? We are going through this process, and we still use the word we, and sometimes we use the word I when we're speaking from this point of view. We're speaking for and from the point of view of the vessel, of the servant, of the mortal self. Most of the time we say we because we are describing this relationship that we are able to receive, like right now, on a continual basis from the consciousness, from our innermost being. It's just that our own imperfections, our own limitations as a vessel, as a messenger, and as a servant of that is what allows or impedes our capacity for the free flow of information from our consciousness, from our innermost, from Attlas, and beyond Attlas, the Logos, to come through us and to you. So then the mind's answer to who and what am I, as you are probably more than aware, see, this is what happens, right? All these bodies get amalgamated. Here and now, you have all of those levels in activity inside of you. But the problem is the mind, not having gone through the process that we just described of awakening, let alone mastery. All those New Agers, right? They say, I am awake. Or worse, the SJWs and the social justice warriors, the SJWs and the postmodernists and the intersectionalists and the neo-feminists, the third wave feminists, and the Marxists, the neo-Marxists, and all the rest of them. They say, I am woke. Or there are other people say, I'm enlightened, or I'm a Buddha, or I'm a master. Or they say, we are all gods already. Yeah, and here's the response of the gods to that. Ryu says, the monad, the true self, is such a player. Playa on playa. That's what I am truly saying when I tell people that phrase. The monad, the player, is the innermost being. The monad consists of the innermost, the divine soul, and the human soul, which is the self. The human soul, which is actually associated with the character. That is who we truly are. That's what we identify with as our soul. But our soul is lunar and very weak in willpower. So even though we can say that the monad travels from lifetime to lifetime, yes, this is true. But the human soul is that which descends. That's the foundation of the character, the persona, the mind and the emotions and the personality and the vital body and the physical body. This is more clear when you look at it in the tree of life. But our innermost being is our innermost being, is the player. He is the one who is here. He is the reason why we are here. And it's the human soul. The human soul is basically Hanuman. The innermost is Rama. Well, that's, you know, when we're doing these live streams, Ryu, we're not exactly doing stand-up comedy, and we're not here to interpret your comments. We try to read them as they come, and we're not going to try to impress upon anyone our sense of humor at this time. So let's continue. A true human in the Iron Age, then, created for a purpose, to serve their inner hero, like Hanuman serves Rama, and both of them serve Krishna. In modern mythological terms, that's Iron Man. Iron Man. No, it's fine. You don't have to apologize. We're apologizing because we didn't get the joke. So Iron Man, when we think about what Iron Man is a suit. He's armor. But the Iron Man suit has an artificial intelligence called Jarvis. The suit has a personality. And if you've watched the movies of the Iron Man movies, you know that Jarvis has his own sort of personality. He has his own kind of limited sort of self-awareness and what have you. And he operates all the mechanisms in the suit. And he also takes instructions from Tony Stark, who in this case represents the innermost being. Tony Stark is the creator of the Iron Man suit, and Tony Stark is the reason why the Iron Man suit exists. The Iron Man suit is a vessel, a vehicle for Tony Stark. For him to do what? For him to be what? A hero, a superhero. He can't do it without the Iron Man suit. And he can't do it without Jarvis, which becomes more than clear if you watch the films. And the other really beautiful allegory, symbol that is included in Iron Man 2 is when Tony discovers a new element, and he fashions that new element and uses it in the arc reactor in the chest piece of the Iron Man suit. And in his own chest, the arc reactor is what keeps him alive. The arc reactor not only powers the suit, but it powers Tony himself, because it's preventing that piece of shrapnel from going into his heart and killing him. So in a very real way, the arc reactor powers Tony's heart. And Pepper Potts gives him a little trophy of the little arc reactor in glass, and it says, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. The arc reactor is an incredible source of energy. It's a source of light. It's a source of power. It is a metaphor for the Christ. It's an allegory for the Christ, and how the Christ is what keeps Tony alive, and it is what powers his suit, because the Christ descended on the tree of life into the root chakra is the Divine Mother, Devi Kundalini Shakti. That's the sexual fire. That's the sexual force. That's the vital body, in other words. So just as the arc reactor keeps Tony alive and makes his existence possible, so too does it power the Iron Man suit and makes Jarvis's existence possible. The personality, the physical body. It's all powered by energy, and it's all aspects of the Christ going down, descending on the tree of life, and powering individuated aspects as we go down. But what happens when the Tesseract, which symbolizes malevolence, it symbolizes the ego, corrupts Jarvis, and Jarvis becomes self-aware? And this corrupted version of Jarvis, this corrupted AI, decides that he's in it for himself, that he has his own desires, his own agenda. Well, what happens is the creation of Ultron. Ultron is nothing but an Iron Man suit with a corrupted AI. Uses the same energy, the same force, the same arc reactor technology, and he uses the same mind, the Jarvis AI. It's just been corrupted by the Tesseract, which is the 4D hypercube, which is the ninth sphere of the sphere on the tree of life, which is the sexual force. And as we know from our other studies, the serpent represents the sexual force. The serpent is Divine Mother Devi Kundalini Shakti. It's the serpent of bronze that Moses raises on his staff. That's the caduceus of Mercury. But we know from the book of Genesis that that serpent also tempts Adam and Eve. And from elsewhere in the Old Testament, from Exodus, we know that the serpents bite at the heels of the Israelites in the desert, the ones who are worshiping the golden calf. They are bitten by the serpents. Moses raises his serpent on his staff, a serpent of bronze, which is an alchemical union of copper and tin. Copper is feminine, tin is masculine, to create bronze, the balancing of masculine and feminine forces. And he raises them on the staff. But the Israelites don't do that. They're bitten by their serpents. We've talked about that. The sexual energy wants to flow, and the Divine Mother gives us all we need in this lifetime. The energy that we need to survive, but also the energy with which she tempts us. The temptation to use the energy in a wrong way, in a selfish way, to make it available to our many egos. We become Ultron. And one can certainly make that relationship to archons, Ryu, but well, we'll just leave it at that. So really what we're looking at is degeneration then. The mind as we know it has fallen, and the consciousness has fallen asleep as a result. And the degeneration carries forward in the mind. That is the modus operandi of the mind. And we can look to examples. This is one of the major hurdles that we face. The mind as an instrument can only ever reflect that. It can only ever process and produce outputs, processed outputs based on inputs. So what the mind outputs is never completely fully objective. It's always a process subjective, altered, mediated version of whatever was input. That's just the law of entropy as it applies to processing, right? Think of the term processed food. Now, can you think of a processed food which is more whole and more wholesome than that which you get from nature? It's impossible. That's what makes it processed. Once you process something, you alter it, and it becomes this shadowy, lesser version. Now, in the example that's on the screen, we have the degeneration of the word faith. And what was it degenerated into? Into belief. And we know this. All you have to do is look at the world religions, look at the born-again Christians, look at the Muslims, any Hindus, you name it. The vast majority of people in this world believe, the vast majority of so-called faithful in this world are believers. Christians think that they are saved as long as they believe that Jesus is their Lord and Savior. But true faith, the true meaning of the word faith, the original meaning of the word faith, means to bind together. Religare in Latin and yug in Sanskrit, the root words of religion and yoga respectively, with our innermost intimate essence of Christ, is the true meaning and nature of having faith. To be one with, to achieve union with, to bind together as in the ties that bind, as in wedding rings. And the origin of this comes from to be faithful to our better half, means to experience union with them physically, to know our mortal beloved intimately. That's the only version of the word faith that survives today in the English language that's true to the original meaning. To be faithful or unfaithful to your spouse. Now, can you be faithful or unfaithful just by believing you are? No. It's an objective fact. Either you are faithful or you are not faithful. But no amount of believing you're faithful is going to matter if you're running around with other people. If you're having polyamorous sex with all sorts of people, then no, you are not faithful. Doesn't matter what you believe. Doesn't matter what contract you write together with your spouse. You're not being faithful to them. You're being unfaithful. Because faith means to experience union with them physically, with them and only them, to know your mortal beloved intimately, apart from all others. To be faithful to our higher self, then, means to experience union with our innermost being metaphysically, to know our immortal beloved intimately. And if you're familiar with the film Immortal Beloved, starring Gary Oldman, about the life of Beethoven, you know that that film spends an exorbitant amount of time postulating and theorizing and speculating about who Beethoven's near mythical immortal beloved was. Which of Beethoven's many lovers and mistresses were his immortal beloved? And sadly, as good as a movie that is from various perspectives, the music, for example, Gary Oldman's performance, for example, sadly, it misses the mark because Beethoven's immortal beloved is his divine mother. It's the love of Rumi's poetry. It is the true identity of the Mona Lisa. Mona Isa, my Isis, my divine mother. That's who our immortal beloved is. Our divine mother is one with our innermost being. And so must we be if we hope to have true faith. But you see, the mind degenerated that word. And the mind easily degenerated that word over a long period of time. So let's look then, in our lifetime, degeneration of the word awake. Now, we have obviously the physical manifestation of going to sleep and waking up in the morning. That's one way, but that's that's just as above, so below. The physical body goes to sleep, physical body wakes up. As above, so below. What we're more concerned with here, and these are terms that really only came into prevalence over the last 20 or 30 years. The awakening of the mind in the new age, right? Here we have dreaming wide awake, lucid dreaming and shamanic healing and psychedelics. And then in more recent years, we have conspiracy theories and all those conspiracy theorists out there that are trying to wake everybody up by spreading their conspiracy theories. And they believe that the Matrix films are an allegory for the shadow government and the world elite and the global elite who are secretly enslaving humanity. And that awakening is, all those anonymous and all those other groups, those conspiracy groups and everything that are claiming that they are awake and that they're helping others to awaken. And then you have the SJW crowd, the postmodernists, the intersectionalists, the feminists, etc. And they're all about being woke. That they're the ones who are awake. They know the truth. They are awake. This is all happening in our lifetime. We walked you through the esoteric, metaphysical physiognomy of a human being and what it takes to be awake. And what being awake really means. It means enlightenment. It means being a Buddha. Do you reckon any of the individuals here claiming to be awake, claiming to be woke, believing they are awakening others by spreading conspiracy theory, etc.? Do you think that they are Buddhas? Do you think that they have accomplished the metaphysical scientific work on themselves? That they've created the solar bodies, that they have eliminated their egos, that they have mastered their mind? Do you think that people taking psychedelics are mastering their mind? They're becoming masters of their mind by taking psychedelics? Or people who lucid dream are becoming masters of their mind just because they travel in the astral plane and they fly around from the planet and they do all these cool things, they do neat stuff. They treat the astral plane like their own personal amusement park. Are they Buddhas? Are they becoming Buddhas? Other problems with the mind. The mind offers no stability, no constancy, and no direction. Just observe your mind. It is like the weather vane atop this fellow's head, blown by the winds. The circumstances will blow the mind this way or that way. Now, in an attempt to feign stability and constancy and direction, what does the mind do? The mind creates identification and dogmatic beliefs and becomes close-minded. It ratchets down. It tries to get a stranglehold. It tries to duct tape this weather vane to the guy's hat so that no matter which way the winds blow, they're always going to think the same way. And you know people like this. These are the stubbornness. This is a stubborn mind. And ironically, the act of resisting the changing winds and having the mind that is inflexible and incapable because it's desperate for that stability and constancy and direction. So it's going to try, the egos are going to try to use the mind to create it in a false way. Ironically, the mind offers no stability, constancy, or direction in terms of rationalization. The mind can rationalize in an infinite number of ways in order to hold on to that dogma. You can watch people do this. You can observe people do this. They believe something, they believe it so ardently that it doesn't matter what evidence you offer to them to debunk their erroneous belief. They will tap dance around that evidence. They will rationalize it away. They will have this completely flexible and playful and clever and demonstrate great ingenuity in order to hold on to that stability and constancy that they're desperately holding on to in the mind. This all can take place, and this all takes place in the mind. Remember, we're talking about problems with the mind. What the mind lacks is a permanent center of gravity. It's a term we get from Samael and Bayor. The permanent center of gravity comes from our being, our innermost essence of the Logos, that which is eternal, that which is connected to all things, that which is connected to the perfect multiple unity of the universe. That permanent center of gravity is within, but it is not within the mind. And if we are stuck within the mind and disconnected from our higher self, we lack that permanent center of gravity. And so the ego creates one, a false one, for us in our beliefs or in our identity, in our tradition, in our culture, in our language, in our race, in our creed, in our religion. The ego is going to create identifications and attachments in the mind. And it's going to offer those up to us in replacement of a genuine permanent center of gravity, the seat of the soul, grounded in our higher self, our true self. The mind is the fertile soil, and you can translate that as the mind is the fertilized soil, heavily fertilized with bullshit, in which the ego can plant the false center of gravity and grow a false identity, a false source of identification, like in the movie Avatar, where what were they called? The blue folk on the planet were identified with their tree. And we listened to a talk yesterday on the nature of trauma, and we were quite disappointed because it was a Zoom call that was hosted by Dr. Gabor Mate, and he had on there a number of guest speakers, and the entire time it was we thought that the talk was going to be about trauma. The entire time all they talked about was social justice warrior victimhood and politicization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one guest speaker from the north, from the Arctic, was talking about how her father explained to her when she was a girl how they are the delta, the river delta. You are the delta. Now, if genuine spirituality is not even identifying with the physical suit, recognizing that that's just a vehicle, that's a vessel. You know how many Iron Man suits that Tony Stark has? He has an entire closet. He has a he has a Iron Man cave, a Bat cave filled with Iron Man suits. I know I crossed my DC and Marvel metaphors there, but you'll forgive me. He's not identified with any one Iron Man suit. He continuously improves his Iron Man suit. And when one gets destroyed, he puts on a new one, or he builds a new one, or he improves it. Just like our physical body, the cells in our physical body are constantly regenerating. You're not the same you were a few days ago. Some cells take longer than others to regenerate. Some, like skin cells, are dying constantly. We're shedding billions of skin cells constantly, every day. They're dying and new ones are taking their place. The mind will enslave us. If we don't, the nature and knowledge, or we can use it to the mission of the innermost being here as a tool. Yeah, and we're going to get to all of that, including your other comment here about silent and listen, the same words, order, listen. You must be silent and meditate to listen to your innermost being. We're going to get to all of that. Roy, you're jumping ahead. We're still talking about the problems of the mind. We can't talk about mastering the mind until we get a firmer grasp of all the different ways in which the mind is the master of us. We need to know this. We need to understand the depth and the breadth and the scope of the problem. So, of course, this is a big one in this day and age. Influence, impressions, suggestions, hypnosis, right? The internet is filled with videos and commentaries and blogs and comments and posts and tweets about how the manipulation of the psyche is everywhere. The Black Lodge, black magic is all around us. All the advertising, all the subliminal advertising, everything that's on television, all the mainstream media, the propaganda, the conditioning, the so-called education system, which is little more than a indoctrination tool, right? The internet is filled with this stuff. But very, 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 very precious few talk about how the most powerful and potent and meaningful sources of manipulation of the mind is the mind itself. The egos, ego mind, ego heart, ego body. It's inside. If you are a master of your mind, no external influence, impression, or suggestion or hypnosis can get to you. If you've mastered your own mind, the only reason why so-called external influences can shape and alter and trick the mind is because the mind is already hypnotizing the consciousness. The consciousness is already hypnotized. If you were awake and if you were the master of your mind, people couldn't get to you through that avenue, or at least it would be very, very, very hard. They could still do it if they were very masterful at their black magic, if they were very masterful at their manipulation. And if we stumbled, if we fell into a moment of relapse, if we fell into a moment of weakness, if we allowed ourselves to become fascinated or become hypnotized, right? If we allow ourselves to become seduced, if we allow ourselves, if we allow ourselves to become identified and attached, if we listen to the mind and its bullshit, then it's easy for others to take advantage of us. Or if we become complacent, we suffer from mystic pride. We believe, oh, I'm awakened already, I'm enlightened already, I'm spiritual already, I'm holy already. We had a interaction with someone on Facebook late last week, which is actually the inspiration for tonight's live stream. And this individual was trying to rationalize for us how ecstatic dance is this great spiritual activity. And they rationalized it in the way they went on an ad hominem attack, and they were saying how I've never really lived, and that God wants us to be blissful and happy, and he wants us to experience that bliss and happiness however we can, etc., etc. And I said to him, I said, well, by that rationale, you're basically just rationalizing every form of hedonism under the sun. You know, you're basically rationalizing unfettered drug use, unfettered drinking, unfettered fornication, unfettered masturbation, because that's really what ecstatic dance is. It's just a form of emotional, physical, mental masturbation. Somebody just writhing around. It's just a more dynamic, active form of hatha yoga. It's just another form of black magic. And then the whole while they're doing that, it's just their ego is lashing out and making them behave in all these ways. And they think that that's their being, that's their spirit, that's their true self expressing themselves through them. We don't recall any enlightened masters ever giving that technique, ever teaching that practice. We also don't recall Shakespeare or Beethoven or any of those artists or any people who exhibit the propensity for high art to behave that way. And there's no art that is expressed that way. Jackson Pollock is not high art. He's just splattering. It's just ego masturbation. It's just desire expressing itself through the medium of paint. And ecstatic dance is just the ego, the false self, expressing itself through randomness of physicality. A robot can do ecstatic dance. It just doesn't create the same endorphins in a robot as it does in the human machine. But regardless, in reaction to our comment about hedonism and about how he's basically justifying hedonism. He came back at us with this ad hominem attack saying, you don't know anything about us, and I'm so altruistic, and I'm so holy, and I'm so spiritual, and I don't drink, and I don't do this, and I don't do that, and I. We just said, you know what? Peace be with you. Just remember, and we shared him a meme about radical humility and mystic pride. Because mystic pride among spiritual seekers is one of the most hypnotic ways in which the mind enslave us. And all those people we talked about, whether they're SJWs or conspiracy theorists or New Agers, and they like to point out that all the black magic and all the bad influences and all the black magic and everything is all out there. It's the global elite, it's the bankers, it's you name it. There's no end to their theories, and it's all outside of us. But we are the helpless, holy, spiritual victims. No. Couple interesting things before we move on. This is just really for fun, this next one. We're going to make it full screen. This is a meme that we pulled off of Facebook, actually. And it says, not everyone can read this. And this is an example of inference. And if you can try to read this part over here. And if you can read this, it says, you have a strange mind too. I couldn't believe that I could actually understand what I was reading. The phenomenal power of the human mind, according to a research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place, etc. You can read the rest if you'd like. Now, this presents us with an interesting problem of inference. Is this really the mind at work? Is it the mind that has the power, the ability to do this? It's possible. Could a computer do this? Well, what a computer would do is it would test each and every combination of letters against a word that's in its database. And then it would check the meaning of the word in the context of the sentence to be sure that that is, in fact, the word that's being used in the case of double meanings and so on. Now, I don't know how fast computers could do that in real time. We know that computers cannot do translations in real time. Computers cannot do real-time stenography. We still require stenographers in courtrooms. Computers are getting better at recording like text-to-speech. But this is like a text-to-speech. This is even more difficult than text-to-speech because this is kind of like text-to-speech in that the computer has to translate what it's hearing into ones and zeros, and then do that same type of comparison, right? To figure out what's being said. So computers can't do that in real time. They can't do real-time translations. There is no universal translator yet, like we have in Star Trek. And who knows how fast a computer it would require and how quickly it would have to be able to access its database of language. So when we think about it in those terms, right, is it really the brain? Is it really the mind that comprehends language? The brain, is it really the type of computer that we think it is, that science, materialist science, believes it to be? Or is it more of what the original OS, what is it more like what we use computers for today? Is it more like smartphones, in that this is a connectivity device? This is an interface device between ourselves and the world. The internet, for example. Right? The internet is not in this phone, right? But the internet connects, the phone connects to the internet, and it can access the internet. In the same way that everything that we know, the mind, is not in the brain. The brain is just the processor. The brain is just the hardware that processes inputs and outputs of the body, and does some, rudimentary, intellectual type computations, and tries to make sense of that which it has access to, in the same way that a browser has to make sense of web pages and then presents them in a way that we can read them, that we can interface with them. So inference is one of these things. And what happens if we're making the wrong inference? Well, that's an interesting dilemma. Because if it's consciousness, if it's higher self processing, that where we get language from, if language is in consciousness and not the mind, then how can we make errors in language? Or is it some sort of blending and amalgamation of the two? But the point here is that there are many, 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 many functions of psyche, of psychology, that we attribute to mind that is not mind. It's consciousness. It's whatever available consciousness we have. But the mind loves to take credit for it. The mind loves to believe that it's the smart one, that it has the answers. Or when it comes up with something, the mind says, "Oh, wow, I'm so glad I thought of that. It just came to me." But the mind will take credit for it. The person will take credit for it. This is a big, big, big problem. This is a big problem because it keeps us identified and trapped and enslaved to the mind, when what we should be cultivating is more free consciousness, awakened consciousness. We'll get to that in just a minute. We saw this and we just had to include it just for shits and giggles, really. We have a woman here thinking, and she says, "I was just thinking, and I just forgot what I was thinking, but I think it was important." This is the nature of those who are stuck in the mind. Without a permanent center of gravity, without anything but conditioned beliefs and dogma and whatever to adhere to, the mind is stuck in this operation, in this function called thinking, which is ultimately processing. So just consider for a moment what a processed food factory can create and can produce. Now, imagine that every time it goes through the process of producing something, whatever comes out of the assembly line of that processed food factory, little by little, they get less and less access to the whole food ingredients that go into the process. So think of it like, let's take it out of the abstract. Let's talk about something specific. Let's look at spaghetti sauce or ketchup. Let's keep it simple. Let's look at ketchup. Ketchup requires tomatoes. right? Tomatoes turn into tomato paste, mixed with water, mixed with lots of sugar, produces and blended up, ground up, right? Tomato paste with and diluted with added with sugar and blended and mixed and cooked and God knows what else they do to it, and boom, you get ketchup. Now, what happens if every month the ketchup that doesn't sell, they take it and they bring it back to the factory and they put it back on this end of the assembly line and they say, well, we have all this surplus ketchup. Let's use fewer tomatoes. Let's use fewer tomatoes. Let's just take the ketchup that we have and mix it back in. And then they do this process again. And then they take the unsold ketchup from the end of the assembly line. They move it to the beginning. And each month, they're using less and less fresh tomatoes as ingredients. And they're using more and more processed ketchup. How long can that cycle sustain itself? Another way to think about it is making a photocopy of 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 a picture. Understanding that the picture was already a mediated form, but every time you make a photocopy of the photocopy of the photocopy of the photocopy, this is what happens, and this is what we're looking at in the world today. The overcomplication, the overcomplexity, the law of entropy is going haywire because this whole humanity is so trapped inside of its intellect, inside of its mind. And it's becoming more and more cut off to the true source of insight, of inspiration, of knowledge, of experience. And now with these lockdowns, everything, and people are traveling less, they're locked inside, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to take a moment to address a couple comments here. Ryu says, ecstatic dance. Look at the roots, like African bonfires, where people use it to go into a trance. Yes. Okay, there's a good example. But dance mechanics done around the golden ratio can actually activate your Merkaba. So, for example, ballet. So we're not denying that. In fact, another example, a better example, we would say, than ballet is zikr. The Sufi dances of zikr. We've participated in those, and they definitely activate all of your chakras. I put all your chakras into activation, and especially the heart and the third eye. And when you participate in zikr with a dervish dancing in the middle. Now, a dervish dance is just rotating, going around and around and around and around, and mixing it with prayer and devotion and love. Zikr is love. It's creating a vortex of love, a space of love, and everyone participating is participating in that. Now, although as a dervish you can dance by yourself as a dervish around and around, zikr is so much more powerful because of the collective nature of it and the shared experience of it. But it's a harmonized experience of it. Ballet, we don't have the same experience with ballet. Roy asks, can you provide how to dance like Sufi's brother? We can post something about that. That is a skill and that is a practice that takes years to develop. Because not the zikr part, the group part is relatively simple and easy, but it requires a group. So to dance like a Sufi dervish, that takes years of practice and study. And the practice is the key, because they can twirl for, you know, what seems like hours on end. But if you tried to do that, Roy, as soon as you stopped, you would collapse in dizziness and nausea, and it would just be your physical body would be so overwhelmed because you're just not used to that motion. So you have to start slow, and you have to start with few revolutions. And one of the tricks that you can do is, when you stop twirling, you put your left hand on your solar plexus, and you put your two fingers, you put your hand on high, so two fingers and the thumb, and you point it right between the eyes at your third eye, and you press, and you put your left hand on your solar plexus. And you can do that, and that will help alleviate the dizziness and the nausea from spinning. But I won't address this any further right now, but I will post something in the coming days about the dervish dance. If you send me a reminder, especially in Messenger, I will do that in case I forget. So coming back to ballet, Ryu mentioned ballet and the dance mechanics. So we practiced something called Laban movement, the Lascomian acting method. We were trained as an actor. And I think we've told this story before, where our acting sensei, George Lascombe, taught acting as a martial art, working with energy and working from the center. The Vesuvian Man was the most important drawing, he said, in history, and certainly for an actor, because it showed us where our center was. And if we moved from our center and everything flowed from the center, there would be a truth to it. There would be a more objective reality to it. It would have its foundation in something that was far greater than a conceptual idea or an egotistical creation, like the method acting or whatever. No, we worked with energies, and we sought out the underlying essences of the words of the text. What is the energy in the text? What is the truth of the energy of the text? And working with what's called Laban movement, which many dancers study. And many dancers study Laban movement. It's based on efforts. So something fast or slow. Is it heavy or light? Is it direct or indirect? We can create these efforts. So for example, press is slow, heavy, and direct. And you don't even have to move. You can just use your voice and press. Or you can flick, which is indirect, light, and fast. Indirect, flick, flick, flick. And this is kind of exaggerated movements, right? But when you put it all together and when you combined it with Shakespeare, something absolutely incredible happened, because Shakespeare has so much energy in the text. You didn't even have to intellectualize anymore. You were still the character. You were still in the character, in the role. You understood the circumstances, what was going on, but you weren't creating egos in your mind. You weren't creating, oh, I'm so sad, or I'm so angry. You didn't have to do that, because the energy was in the text, the truth was in the words, and the energy was there, and that guided you. And once you had attuned your body to working with these efforts in an exaggerated way, you could then dial it back. And then all of a sudden, the energy and the truth of the words were flowing through you, and your body became like an instrument. And it was working through you, and all of a sudden, the performances were absolutely astounding. The truth of the language of the words coming through the physicalization, through the vocalization, through the energy that was being interchanged between the actors and the audience. It was a phenomenal experience. That's the closest thing that I've ever experienced to ballet. But I imagine ballet is not dissimilar to this. When the ballet dancer has spent years tuning their instrument, like a musician tunes a guitar or a piano, and they've attuned their instrument so finely that when the music flows through them, they move to the music and they become the physical embodiment of that music and the physical expression of the truth and the beauty and the light and the love which is present in the music. And they visualize that. And there have been cases of individuals and groups that were able to achieve this to one degree or another in film, where they create visualizations to the music that capture the spirit and the essence of the underlying beauty and the truth that was present in the music. So in our case, because A, we're not musical, and B, we're not a dancer, but we did study acting, as we said, as a martial art, and and we did have some experience with this when we used to figure skate as a child, because figure skating is basically, we did ice dancing actually. So we had to do that. Artistic impression was important, right? We had to allow the music and allow the dance to work through us, and we become very much a servant of the music. And as an actor doing Shakespeare, if you become a servant to the words on the page, right? There's truth there. If you can get at it, and then you become a servant of that truth, a messenger of that truth. And in many ways, that was a kind of a foreshadowing of what we're doing now. Only the difference is there is no text for us to read. It's being written for us in real time by our innermost being, by the Logos. And we are expressing that here and now. And we could do it live, improvised. We've done that in university. We would improvise whole monologues in real time for audiences. Dramatic monologues improvised in real time. And that's one of our great joys as a creator, and that's one of the basis for what we call Attlas arts, which is, again, we're getting off topic. So the difference then is when, like, a chef takes raw ingredients and wholesome, whole, fresh ingredients and becomes their servant and allows the flavors and the textures to work themselves. And he's just a servant. He's doing the chopping, he's doing the mixing, he's doing the cooking, he's doing the baking, he's doing all that stuff. But he's doing that in service of the final product. And the final product that he's looking to capture the essence and this harmony and interplay of melodies, like a dancer is trying to express harmoniously, but also an interplay of melodies, the complementary melodies, and the complementary, and then doing that all harmoniously, and then express that beauty and that light and that love, versus art for art's sake, which is, let me defecate on a canvas and put it on a wall in an art gallery, and charge people money to see it and charge people money to buy it. Or let me splatter paint on a canvas completely randomly, just with all of my anger and frustration and all of my egos and all of my sadness and all of my this and that, and get all of that out onto the canvas and call it art. It's not art. It's therapy, maybe, of some kind, of one form or another, some kind of cathartic therapy, but it's not art. It's not high art, anyway. There's another word, by the way, that was degenerated by the mind, by the ego mind. So when things get into the mind and get bounced around in there over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, It's just like the ketchup factory. It's just like the photocopier. Every copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy gets more degenerated, gets more entropy. It's a more terrible, horrible representation of the truth. It's more subjective. It's just crap. Right? We don't eat processed food. We don't serve processed food to our guests and our loved ones. We cook for them. We cook fresh meals for them. Why? Right? We put our love and everything into it. We try to bring out the best of ourselves, of the food and everything. Why? Because we love them. And we want to have a harmonious, beautiful time breaking bread with those we love. We don't throw down a bowl of Kraft macaroni and cheese. Sorry, you can't even call it that anymore. We don't throw down a bowl of Kraft dinner or a styrofoam thing with like instant noodles or whatever, or whatever type of processed food you can imagine. We just don't do that. Okay. Let's move on. So with all these problems that we've identified, and there are more, by the way, and we might get into them as we get into the next section. You're all here because you want to know, well, how do you become a master of this? How do you master this? Well, we begin with self-observation, also known as mindfulness. Now, you've heard this many, many times, and we're talking about observing our 3 brains and our 5 centers. So the intellectual, emotional, motor, instinctive, sexual. We can simplify that by saying staying in observation of our mind, heart, and body. This is step 1. Right? Nothing can happen if we are not doing this step. If we are not practicing self-observation, if we are not observing our mind, we cannot master. You cannot be a master of what you are unaware of. Imagine trying to master horseback riding, trying to master, becoming a master of the horse, while you're off daydreaming about God knows what. Right? You got to be present. You got to be there. You have to be one with the animal. You have to take the reins of the horse. And you have to do whatever techniques that are available to you to get that horse under control and under your control and in your service, to go where you want it to go, to do what you want it to do. This is step 1. You have to be present and aware of your own mind, not identified with it. You are not the horse. You are not the hammer that's in your hand. It doesn't matter how important it is to the job that you're doing. If you're chopping wood, you need an axe, but you are not the axe. And yet, lumberjack and axe are one. They are one. They work as one. They're united as one. But the lumberjack is not identified with the axe. But if the lumberjack doesn't respect the axe, if the lumberjack becomes cocky or naive or complacent, his mind starts wandering. You know what's going to happen? He's going to lose a foot. He's going to be being rushed to the emergency station to get stitches in his leg or in his face, in his forehead, because He hit the piece of hardwood. He hit a knot the wrong way, and the axe bounced back and hit him in the face. That's what's going to happen. Same thing when we're driving. When you're driving on the highway, how many people fall asleep driving on the highway? And I don't mean literally physically falling asleep. I mean your mind starts to wander. Oh, I can't believe all the traffic. Oh, this. Oh, I don't know. Blah blah blah. This is about me. And then you look up and you realize, oh my God, I've just gone 50 miles. Where the hell did the last 50 miles go? You were lost, enslaved by your mind. Your mind took you and said, la di da di da, like the Pied Piper leading the children, right? Playing a hypnotic tune. The mind just playing that tune, la di da di da di da di da. And you got caught up in it, and off you went. And then, boom, you woke up 50 miles later, 50 miles in an hour later. You were like, where the hell did the last 45 minutes go? How the hell did I get here? Have you ever missed an exit on a highway doing that? You know you have. And if not that particular example, something similar to that. Everybody has, myself included. I have missed bus stops, right? I have missed off-ramps. Just because of the capacity. Okay. Yeah. Ryu's made a comment here about dance. I do flow dance like that all the time. Our ancestors understood that dance is the elixir of life. Our ancestors didn't dance like that. Only primal savages dance like that. Whatever you think you're doing, you think you're doing. That's what you think you're doing, but that's not what you're doing. Forget about energy being grounded, ions exchanged for healing. All that is all intellectual bullshit that's in your mind. Guaranteed, 100%. Flow dance, ecstatic dance. This is what savages do. This is what primal people do. This is what people who are in the flow of devolution, people who are evolving, do not dance like that. They don't. This is a devolutionary act. And the idea that our ancestors dance this way means that either you are not aware of what our ancestors did and didn't do, or you've bought into the idea that we all evolved from primal savages and that we all evolved from monkeys, and that at some point monkeys started to dance and that sort of led to civilization. It's not true. That's not dancing. It is what it is, and you can call it what you want to call it, and you can call it therapy, you can call it many, many things, but it is not spiritual dance. Just like Hatha yoga doesn't lead to spirituality either. Hatha yoga is black magic. So you've convinced yourself, you've rationalized it, you've had your reasons. Your mind has given you the reasons, but we're giving you the truth. And your mind won't like it, but it's the truth. Okay, so let's continue to on the point of mindfulness here. One of the things that we will notice when we're practicing mindfulness is we all have our inner Statler and Waldorf. Now, you should be familiar with these characters. If you're not, they're from the Muppet Show from the 70s and 80s. And the Statler and Waldorf are our inner critics. They're the ones that, as we are observing ourselves and we find something, they're the voices in our head that start to judge us. And we want to be very mindful of their presence. So when those voices show up, and they will, when we observe an ego, operating ourselves, we're watching ourselves behaving in a certain way, or certain thoughts come to into our head, and they're negative thoughts, or they're thoughts of self-sabotage, or they're self-defeating thoughts, or whatever they are, and then immediately these voices in our head start popping in saying, oh, look at you again. Oh, Mr. Spiritual, look at you thinking these negative things again. Or how could you think that way? Or look at you having these lustful thoughts, or look at you having these gluttonous thoughts, or laziness thoughts, or whatever the case may be, or these thoughts of pride, or look at you angry again, Mr. Spiritual, right? Look at you losing your temper. Oh, and you go on Facebook and tell everybody you're Mr. Spiritual. You're telling everybody you're Mr. Attlas or whatever. And look, you just lost your temper again. Look, what kind of spiritual person do you think you are? What, on and on and on and on and on and on and on it goes. And we're not the only ones. Everybody is their own worst critic. Everybody. Even the narcissists, even the self-centered, the most toxic, self-centered, egotistical narcissists will be their own worst critic. Why do you think? How do you think they get motivated, and what do you think motivates them to become so narcissistic and so self-obsessed? But the way they look, but the way they behave, but the way they hold themselves in public, how they nurture and foster and manage their public perception, how everybody thinks about them and feels about them, and what's driving that is this inner commentary of inner judgment. But guess what? It's all the mind. It's the mind doing that. And one of the key things that the mind will do is it will set up this false dichotomy whereby these voices in your head, as you're observing your mind, these voices of your head will break off and play the role of your true self. These voices in your head will pretend to be your innermost. And they will feed you all of this very highfalutin, spiritually sounding, spiritually related, religious related, esoteric related nonsense. You have to do this, you have to do that. Oh, you better meditate, you better do this, you better do that. Oh, you better do 100 Hail Marys, or you better do 2 hours in meditation, or you better do this, or you better do that. And it's just, there is no limit to the amount of these sorts of voices. And they play off of each other, and they play off of you. It's divide and conquer. And you just observe yourself, and you watch this, and you watch this, and just remember, you are the observer. What you are observing it's one of the 7 principles in the Hermetic teachings, right? It's all in the mind. It's all in the mind. You observe that. But then what do you do with it? What can you do with it? Like, well, this self-observation, mindful. Okay, fine, I'm mindful of it, but now what? What if it never shuts up? What if it keeps going? What if it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, 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 worse? And then what? Well, that's next. Oh, sorry, before we get there. This quote from Master Samael: if we really want true peace, we must learn how to live like a guardian in times of war, always alert and vigilant with a quick and flexible mind, because peace is not a matter of romantic fantasies or beautiful daydreams. One of my favorite quotes of Samael and Mayor: we must learn how to live like a guard in times of war. Right? So, but a guard in a time of war, more than just observant, alert, and vigilant, with a quick and flexible mind. What's this quick and flexible mind part? Right? There's more to this than just observing, than just being mindful. There's more to this. And that, we got this term from Samael, Master Samael, psychological judo. We practice this. Psychological judo. Well, let's start with what the hell is judo? This is judo. Now, this is going to be on repeat until everyone can see how the girl in the white, she goes in for the attack. She goes and tries to get the girl in the blue in a headlock. And what does the girl in the blue do? She uses the attack and turns it around and uses the attack that the white opponent used against her. She turned it around and then she pins her down. She turns it into a takedown. Judo is the martial art of using your opponent's force against them, turning it around. And because every action contains energy, contains a force of momentum that is coming against us. And if we can shift and sidestep and redirect that motion, that kinetic force, that kinetic energy back around, turn it around, we can then turn it against the adversary and then dispel the attack. We can defend the attack. We can counter the attack. It's the right word that we're looking for. Okay, so what does that look like in terms of psychology? Okay, a thought arises, right? Whatever that thought is, that messy whatever thing arises. So what do? It's the moment that the thought arises. If we're in observation of ourselves, we see it, we say, yep, there it is, then we let it go. Now that might sound overly oversimplified, but if you practice this, what you will experience, it's just like in judo. When you first start out in judo, when you first start out in martial art, and someone explains to you how you can take an opponent's punch or opponent's attack and turn it around and counter it using the very force. So you're using practically no energy, no effort whatsoever. You turn around and subdue them. You're like, yeah. That's just all talk. But then when you see it done, that's what judo practitioners do. When you practice this, you will discover that you will be able to do like flipping the channels on the TV, right? You see it, and then you let it go. And then another one will come, and then you let it go. And another, and another, and another, and another, and another, and another. And if you do this in meditation, okay, psychological judo, in meditation, you observe the thought, you let it go. You acknowledge it, you recognize it. This is not a passive activity, right? This is an active, conscious activity. After a while, the adversary, the mind, is going to run out of steam. It's going to run out of stuff to throw at you. It's going to reach the end of the channels of the 5,000 cable channel network. And you will discover that the mind settles down by itself. It settles down and it becomes like a still mountain lake. And a still mountain lake can reflect the heavens. This is when mind becomes absolutely invaluable. And this methodology of meditation right? Psychological judo. Just whatever pops into your head, you acknowledge it, you see it, and if you can, identify the ego behind it. That's an advanced kind of form of psychological judo, right? But when something comes in your head, say, oh, yeah, okay, there's pride. Something up, okay, yeah, okay, there's lust. Let it go. Oh, yeah, okay, man, there's my victim mentality. Okay, yeah, let it go. There's this, let it go, let it go. And then eventually it's going to settle down. Okay, the wind in Chinese medicine, air or wind is, and I mean also in Ayurveda, I believe, in actually most esotericism, wind is mind, air is mind. So what causes the ripples on the water on the lake is the mind blowing. Is the mind blowing, right? So when the wind stops blowing, it runs out of gas, it runs out of steam. The surface of the lake becomes perfectly still and like a mirror, and then it can reflect the heavens. And then you can receive onto the mind, projected onto the mind from the consciousness, from the innermost being, a reflection of even truths that are from the logos. But again, the challenge is going to be when it finally arrives in the mind, that's going to stimulate the mind. And the mind, those Statler and Waldorf, they're immediately going to want to leap on it. The mind is going to grab it and take it and run with it. So you have to recognize that. Say, yep, okay, there they come, trying to steal this beautiful thing. They're trying to come create ripples in the water. It's like if I had a beautiful Labrador retriever sitting next to me, next to this mountain lake, and I threw a tennis ball into the mountain lake, that Labrador retriever is going to go crazy and run and jump in the water after that ball, and that entire lake is going to be covered in ripples for the next 10 minutes. This is what happens when we receive something in meditation and we have quieted the mind, but the mind is still there, and the mind is just waiting with bated breath, just waiting for something to land on the surface of the water that it can go retrieve, and it goes splashing around in the water and make a whole bunch of ripples again. And because if you've experienced meditation, you've practiced meditation, you know that this is what happens. So when we're in meditation and the mind flares up a bit again, or the mind throws some kind of breakthrough thought at us, again, yep, there it is. Now let it go. Don't allow yourself to get caught up in the Statler and Waldorf, right? The inner judgmental stuff, which is going to happen when you're sitting there in meditation. How many times have you been in meditation and you've been sitting there going, oh my God, why can't my mind just shut up? Why can't I do this? Or why is this so hard? Why is this that, and you're sitting there and you're getting caught up in all this on how hard it is and why you can't do it and how you're probably not spiritual, because if you were spiritual, you'd be able to meditate more or easier or longer or etc. It's all just mental gymnastics. It's all just, it's all just your mind, messing with you. This works. Practice this, do it in meditation, do it throughout the day. Just recognize that this, you are in this judo match with your mind, between your consciousness, your higher self, and your mind. And remember, this is all about liberating consciousness, right? Getting free of the traps of the mind, getting free of the problems of the mind. Okay. The next one we're going to talk about, we've talked about this at length. But for those of you who missed it, just a very, very brief summary here. Usually, when the circumstances around us are going to hell, and there's a storm, right? Um, you know, we usually think of ourselves here on the boat, and we're lost at sea. Okay, and the mind, the winds are blowing. We're talking about gale force winds. The ocean is choppy. Forget about clear mind. Forget about reflecting the heavens. We're just trying to stay afloat. We're just trying to keep our head above water. We're just trying to keep our vessel from smashing on the rocks, right? And that's over on this side. That's when we're identified and we're attached, and the storm is raging. And I don't mean around us physically, I mean mentally, in our mind. The circumstances around us or within us emotionally or whatever is causing our mind to create this storm of pain, suffering, anxiety, whatever the case may be, depression. It could be panic. It could be any number of things. Worry. It could be any number of things, but it's raging like a storm. And we're trying to keep afloat. We're trying to keep ourselves from drowning. And again, with the spirit of self-observation in mind, with mindfulness in mind, okay? But again, this healthy distancing, we want to be over here. Here, you see, you have a galleon. You have a bloody ship, okay? But it doesn't matter. If you're stuck on that ship, you're still going to be crapping your pants, okay? Because you're within a hair's breadth of being sucked under by the ocean, and the ocean has sank many, many, many ships, okay? But over here, you just have a little dinghy. You have a little freaking rowboat in the middle of a maelstrom. But guess what? You're perfectly happy, and you're perfectly okay, and you're perfectly at peace. Why? Because you are in the lighthouse. Not only are you in the lighthouse, you're in the lighthouse, you're the lighthouse keeper. And you're shining the light of consciousness on the rowboat. The rowboat is empty. You're not in the rowboat, you're in the lighthouse. Just remember that. Practice that. This is a very practical technique, and it's especially useful for chronic type conditions like depression, anxiety, stress, worry, when you are stuck in a pattern of thinking, some sort of a belief, some sort of a recurring you can call it a psychological song. It's like almost like when you have a song stuck in your head, but it's some kind of an idea or a thought or a belief that's just churning and churning and churning away, and you can't get away from it. Just keep observing it. But find that healthy distancing. Okay, there's my mind, right? There's my anxiety, there's my depression, there's my stress, and observe it from the lighthouse. I'm on solid ground, because your lighthouse, right? The light, you're the lighthouse keeper, and you're shining a light on the boat so that it doesn't smash on the rocks. But you're dry and you're on solid ground. You are grounded in your permanent center of gravity, which is your innermost being. Your innermost being, right, provides the light, shines the light of consciousness. That's the lighthouse keeper. But the light itself is the Logos. It's the Christ. The light of consciousness comes from the Christ. It is something that is focused and directed consciously by our innermost being and by our human soul. So the lighthouse aligns us and puts us where we need to be in relationship to mindfulness, especially during the hard times, especially during the particularly challenging, nasty trials and tests and ordeals that we have to go through, the painful, the loud, the boisterous, the you name it, like the storms. But we need a lighthouse to keep ourselves from smashing on the rocks and to keep our head above water. We keep our head above water by remembering that, by not identifying with the captain on the ship. The captain on the ship is just our personality. And the ship itself is just a vessel, just a vehicle. So the physical body is a vehicle and the personality is just the captain. Be the lighthouse keeper. And what's more, be the light. This is a powerful practice. It might sound kind of woo, or I don't know, but if you put it into practice, we who suffer from depression, this is how we get through depression. This is why we are able to get out of the bed and be productive. We can work out. We can do other things that actually then have compounding positive effects. We can do housework. We can do we can eat properly. We can work out. We can go grocery shopping. We can interact with other people. We might not be able to be particularly creative. We might not be able to be inspired or insightful or have a lot of success meditating but it's okay. It's okay. When you're in the middle of the storm, nobody expects you to be able to paint a beautiful painting while you're in the middle of a storm, right? You just need to make it through the storm. That's the point. But make it through the storm in one piece. And hey, and if you can still get to where you want to go, still get to where you're going, navigate through the storm, then more power to you, right? And that's what I mean by still being productive and still being able to. Many people who suffer from depression, they can't even get out of bed. And we have that level of severe depression, right? We are on disability for depression. That's how severe a depression we have. So, and we refuse to take medication for it. We won't medicate ourselves out of the depression. This is our medication, the consciousness, the light, the logos. This is what we need to get through our storms. All right. The next one is for those acute circumstances when we are faced with some severe and sudden attack of the mind. This could be a panic attack. This could be, but it's also, this is when thoughts and this is when we're crossing over just talking about mind and thoughts into heart mind, right? Heart mind, where emotions are coming into play and we're having physical, visceral, energetic reactions to something. So someone has insulted us, offended us, triggered us, and we've been triggered by something inside of us that some circumstances or person or situation or whatever, what have you, some stimuli has triggered us, and we're now in the grips of possession by some ego, by something, and it's infected us in our mind, and our mind has got us in its grip, and it's going to do something. It wants to get us to act in a way that we know we're going to regret. But we might not know it in the moment because we're caught up in the anger, in the frustration, in whatever. We've all been there. We all know what we're talking about here. Okay, that sudden, immediate, no warning, no no ability to prepare, just out of the blue, and then bang, you're in that place. Okay, so what do? You can take a long, slow breath, okay, and visualize, and if you do pranayama, you will know how to do this. You will take that breath up from the coccyx all the way up to the crown chakra. And then move the breath over around to the third eye, and then exhale it into the heart chakra. If you can remember to do the mantras Hamsa, then do so. You can do them mentally in your head. So it's like you do one Hamsa pranayama, basically. And remember your inner shepherd. That's what this visualization is here for. Okay? In his left hand, he has your heart. In his right hand, he points with your through your third eye. And this, your inner shepherd, is an essence of the Christ, which means his foundation is the divine feminine, the fires of the divine feminine, and his crown are the fires of the Holy Spirit, the fires of the divine masculine. So root to tip, foundation to summit, to pinnacle, right? Foundation to pinnacle, the essence of the logos within you, your innermost being, your intimate Christ, is fire. So if the fire is being abused, is being stolen by egos, is being triggered, and it's about to flow down and out, and remember your inner shepherd. And the shape that it travels, of course, is the shepherd's crook. And the shepherd's crook is the tool, the staff of the shepherd with which he controls his flock, his animals, his animal primal self. It's good. It's the hook, and it's everything else. This can be a very, very powerful tool. And how powerful is it? If you are practicing white tantra, if you are on the verge of losing control and having an orgasm, you can use this practice sped up. Keep moving the energy up and in, up and in, up and in and around into the heart and up and into the round, and you can prevent the orgasm from taking place. You can dial it back, you can turn it back. If you can prevent lust from expelling the sexual energy down and out and wasting it, lust, who is the most powerful of all of our egos, the mother of all egos, the harlot of Babylon, lust, desire itself. At the very moment that lust is about to get what it wants, to get its way, to have its desires fulfilled, and consume our sexual force and create more copies of itself, right? As all parasites do. We've talked about many, many times how the egos steal our sexual energy and bottle up the consciousness. Well, just at the very moment that we are possessed by lust, and she's got us, she's got our consciousness, she's got the mind in the grip, she's got our physical body, she's got everything, and the only thing now she wants is to just get that last step, the sexual force, for us to lose and spill the sexual energy, whether we're men or women now, doesn't matter. This practice can reverse that process and defeat lust. You can use this to reverse almost anything in any situation if you catch it quickly enough, and if you do it with enough conscious energy, willpower. In addition, we don't have a slide for this. If you have lustful thoughts, if you have thoughts which you're not particularly proud of, lustful thoughts about maybe a friend's wife, or like a stranger, you see a couple walking down the beach, and you find yourself very attracted to one of the two couples, but they're obviously a couple, and your mind wants to fantasize and commit adultery with one of the two, just mentally, but it's still adultery because the mind is more real than the physical world. Think of your divine mother. Here, we're thinking of our innermost shepherd. We're thinking of our Christ. But rest assured that you can replace the shepherd does not have to be male. The shepherd doesn't have to be Jesus. The shepherd can be Buddha. The shepherd can be the Mona Lisa. The shepherd can be the Virgin Mary. The shepherd can be Isis. Because in Egyptian mystery schools, all of the gods are always carrying staffs and sticks and what have you. This can be Moses. This can be whoever you identify with as representative of your innermost being, your innermost shepherd, your innermost essence of the intimate Christ. The Christ, the Logos, who is the perfect multiple unity, okay, doesn't discriminate. He's not going to say, oh, well, you visualized Buddha. I'm not very happy with that. I don't think I'm going to help you. No. That's the Logos is everything. So, but we want to visualize that representation of the Logos, which most directly affects the fire. So whatever we want a Christified master. We want to use Zoroaster or Mithras or Wodan, Fuji, again, Mary Magdalene, the Virgin Mary. I mean, it doesn't matter from that standpoint, so long as it's associated with the fire, because this practice really is a practice of reining in the fire that's gone bad, the fire that's about to flow down and out, whether it's going to flow down and out in anger or violence or we're about to break something or smash something or whatever. We've just been brought to the brink, or we're on the verge of an orgasm or whatever. We've just been brought to the brink and we need to be brought back from the brink. This practice will do that, combined with the remembering and the visualization and the movement of the energy and the circulation of the energy and the hamsa, the transmutation of that energy in that moment. It can be done. It can be done. You're not always going to be successful. You're not always going to remember to do it. Okay? Let's make that perfectly clear. And you're not always going to be successful at doing it. But guess what? This is not easy to do, right? When we're fighting the mind, we're fighting our egos. They've got us to that point. They're not going to go quietly into the night. That's why we need powerful practices that we can use in the moment to help us. Okay, moving on. This relates to the transformation of impressions and, of course, meditation. Everything that we've been talking about has been about consciously processing and responding consciously to some circumstance, whether it's externally or internally or a combination of the two, external circumstances which trigger internal reactions, and we have to deal with the internal reactions, and we have to consciously process how we deal with those internal reactions, i.e. in the mind, because it's all in the mind, in the heart mind, if we want to use that expanded definition for this, for the purposes of this part. So the transformation of impressions refers to the fact that existence is really an alchemical process whereby energies are constantly being transformed and transmuted from one form to another form. Everything is energy, everything is vibration, everything comes into us as vibration, gets processed, right? And then gets transformed into a different vibration or a different form, transmuted that same vibration but into a different form. So, for example, the best way to understand this is we eat food. We eat food and we digest food. Yeah? And that food becomes our body. The energy in the food becomes our body, becomes our actions. You are what you eat. Now, what happens if you don't digest your food? What happens if you don't have enough probiotics? What happens if you don't digest your food? Well, what happens is it goes into your intestines, undigested, and you end up having big problems with the old plumbing. This is just practical, right? This is just fact. This is objective fact. If you do not digest what you take into your body, what you take into your body will not feed you. It will not energize you. It will not, it'll kill you. Honestly, you can have such severe problems if you're unable to digest your food. Lack of energy, but also the actual physical congestion of undigested food. In fact, they will tell you what statistics doctors or whatever will tell you something that the average male has, I don't know how many pounds of undigested red meat in their colon, and that this stagnant undigested red meat is partly what's responsible for the huge explosion in colon cancer and rectal colon cancer and all those other issues related, the cancers and whatnot related to the digestive system. Incidentally, we happen to be on a 3-day fast. You caught us in the middle of it. It's something that everybody should do for a number of different reasons, but especially because of this digestion aspect, right? But fasting, right, when you do it physically, you should also do it mentally and spiritually as well, right? Because, and this is where we're getting to, we have to treat impressions as food. What counts as an impression? Anything that we take into our body through our eyes, through our ears, through our touch, through our senses. Touch, taste, hearing, sight, smell. These are impressions. Now, we just talked about what happens if you don't digest your food. What happens to that food, right? It doesn't energize us. It doesn't serve us. It doesn't nourish us. It clogs us up and gives us cancer or outright kills us, right? So why would it be any different if we fail to digest what we take into when we take into our mind through our senses? When we do things mechanically, when we do things automatically, when we don't pay attention, when we're not mindful, we're not observing ourselves, we're not paying attention to what's out there, we're certainly not paying attention to what's in here. But we're constantly taking in these impressions, and we're taking them in, 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 and we're not digesting them. What do you suppose happens? If as above, so below, and everything is energy, the food we take in is energy, it just happens to be coalesced and coagulated into what appears to be physical substance. And we take that into our physical body. Well, we know from earlier in this presentation that we have a mental body and we have an astral body. Those are bodies. We have a mental body. So what happens if we take impressions and we're feeding our mental body impressions that we are not consciously digesting? We're digesting them automatically, mechanically. We're digesting them as a lunar mental body, not a solar mental body. The answer is those impressions are giving us cancer. The answer is those impressions are not nourishing us. They're not giving us energy. They're robbing us of energy. They're clogging up our subconscious mind. They're clogging up the plumbing. And they're giving us cancer. And we know this for a fact. And we're not talking cancer metaphorically here. Literally causing us cancer. Literally. All that junk TV, all that garbage music, all that garbage mainstream media news bullshit. How about Facebook? How about YouTube? How about pulp fiction books? How about endless, mindless jibber-jabber conversations, meaningless, pointless? How about gossip? How about bitching and complaining? Because remember, impressions can go both ways. We can receive impressions from within, and then we automatically and mechanically spill them out. If we have to be able to digest the impressions. Now, how does one do that? Well, the simplest way to do that is the psychological judo that we described earlier. To pay attention, to acknowledge it, and then let it go. And if you can, at the beginning, it's not so easy, but you will get more skilled at this as you practice it in your day-to-day life, to identify the ego behind the impression, or the egos being stimulated within you by the impression. In other words, what is getting triggered by you? How is this impression causing mechanical, automatic, lunar reactions inside of you? And what is it inside of you which is reacting? And then you can identify what is it in the impression that's triggering the reaction. Very, 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 very quickly, and then let it go. It's like, you don't have time to chew your food 20 times before you swallow it. Not when you're dealing with impressions, because they're coming too fast. But the difference is they're not physical impressions, right? They're sensory impressions, and you're not digesting them. The first level of digestion in the physical body is the mouth. The saliva and the teeth work up the food. They start processing the food. They start chewing the food, chewing the fat before you swallow it and send it into the acid in the stomach, right? Well, that's a very slow, arduous process, right? Especially if you're a cow. I don't mean that literally. I don't even mean it figuratively. I just mean, we all know that cows like to chew their cud for a very long time. But your consciousness is very, 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 very fast. It's instantaneous. So the proper transformation of impressions cannot take place in the mind, right? It cannot. You have to use your consciousness, because you can't sit there and go, okay, now he said I chew like a cow, and that implies that I'm fat, and I don't like being called fat. So, okay, that explains why that I reacted poorly to that comment. See, you don't have the time to do those mental gymnastics when you're transforming impressions. It's like earlier when we were reading that meme, the one with all the jumbled up letters and the words, but we were able to read it. And I was saying, is that really the mind that's doing all those computations? Or is it the consciousness that just knows? That just knows. It's instantaneous. When you know something, you just know it. You don't have to think about it. You know it. Transformation of impressions is the powerful, meaningful, moment by moment, everyday practice that we should be doing all the time, especially when we're watching TV or watching a movie or speaking with somebody else or having any type of thing where there's sort of reactions bubbling up inside of us, or or any other thing that kind of promotes us falling asleep, promotes us daydreaming, promotes our mind wandering. Right? We want to, or if we catch our mind wandering, or if we watch our mind wandering, right? Like in psychological judo, in meditation, right? The transformation of impressions that arise in meditation. Now, why do you suppose, or this is so important, not only for the digesting of the food part, right? When we talked earlier about, in other live streams, about egos and alchemy, and that contained inside of the egos is the knowledge of how those egos enslave us. To be able to digest impressions is to be able to have the consciousness involved in the observation and the processing and the digestion of experience. And when you digest experience, you have the ability to extract the nourishment, the nutrients, and the energy that's trapped inside of those experiences. In the same way that digestion releases the vitamins and the nutrients and the energy that's trapped within the physical food we eat. It's the same process. So the reason why meditation included in this slide and in the discussion of transformation of impressions is because it is later on that we, in meditation, that we go in and can retrospect on our day, retrospect on our experiences. And if we were transforming the impressions while they were taking place, then we have the raw material to then use in meditation to continue the digestion process. And we run the scenario again in our imagination, our conscious imagination, not in our mind. We're not thinking about it. We're not racking our brains about it. We're not trying to figure it out. We're just replaying it like a coach or a trainer or an athlete replays their past performances. So a tennis player, a boxer, a race car driver will replay footage from their past performances to see what they did wrong, what they could have done differently, or Where did it all go wrong? Right? Where was the moment that it went wrong? But they rely on instant replay and video footage. When you're practicing transformation of impressions as part of your self-observation practice, you have the raw video footage in your consciousness. It's in your memory and it's in your consciousness, and now you can work with it in meditation. What's on the screen here is the cover for The Revolution of the Dialectic. A lot of the techniques that we've shared so far are covered in this book. This book is probably, it's one of the most difficult books Master Samael wrote, but it is particularly useful if you are willing to get into the heavy language and the heavy, the deep way in which he penetrates into the nature of the mind and the dialectic nature of the mind, and how the goal is to move beyond the dialectic. In other words, beyond this or that, black or white, us or them, into a holistic space of comprehension. We've talked about this in the past when we've talked about the Tao. There is no way that we can do justice even in a 3-hour live stream. But we're not here to do that, right? Like we've said many times, we're not here to regurgitate or to just represent or just copy and paste what other people have done. We're here to express it in a more simple and synthesized way, and then present to you the resources that you can go, if you want to go and explore it deeper intellectually, in the hopes that that will aid you. And remember that when you read Master Samael's books, you can meditate on every line, you can meditate on every paragraph, on every concept. You can meditate on his books, and don't read them like a newspaper. Don't read them intellectually. Read them with your consciousness. Read them with your heart, not your mind. That's one of the other key practices that we wanted to mention, is that we want to rely less and less and less and less on that instrument, and rely more and more and more and more on our consciousness, and developing the discernment between the two. And transformation of impressions and meditation are key to making that possible, to accomplishing that task, because the flavor, and we use that word specifically, the flavor will be different. Because ultimately the mind, among other things, yes, it's a central processing unit. Yes, it takes inputs and produces outputs. Yes. Okay. But in many ways, the screen, it's just like a screen, and it only shows what's projected onto it. And there's a specific flavor when the egos are projecting onto it versus when the innermost being is projecting onto it. But that discernment happens in consciousness. It doesn't happen in the mind. The mind cannot tell the difference. If you're relying on the mind doesn't know the difference, because the mind cannot understand the mind. It just can't. It can't. It'll always get lost in the convoluted thing of what we showed earlier about the slide, about the woman thinking about what she forgot she was thinking about, but she thought it was pretty, she thinks it was pretty important, what she was thinking about. It's just always running around and around and around and around and around, getting caught in these logical finger traps. But the consciousness is able to comprehend. And so all of these practices, we want to always, again, whether it's being in the lighthouse, whether it's practicing psychological judo, whether it's transformation of impressions, we are engaging the consciousness, and we are remaining awake and aware and identified with our innermost observer. right? The lighthouse keeper and the light, not the boat and not the ship captain, right? That's, again, just another example of creating that separation, that healthy separation between the player and the character. And this is because the mind, right, if it's lunar and it's in the control of the character, right, it's going to trap the consciousness. But if we make it solar and in the control of the being, then it's a powerful tool for us to use. The creation of the solar bodies, we mentioned earlier, that's a process of sexual alchemy. Pranayama, which we mentioned during the Shepherd's Crook, you should be practicing that every day before you meditate. That will assist in that process. And finally, right, because you can do all the pranayama you want, you can do all the sexual alchemy you want, but if you're not practicing the comprehension and elimination of egos, if you're not practicing the Aum of life, you're not going to get anywhere. In fact, you're going to awaken negatively. You're going to awaken through the egos, through the mind, through the lunar self, the lunar lower selves. You will awaken negatively, not as an angel, but as a demon. You won't awaken as this being, you'll awaken as this being. And if we're all here, we presume we don't want to awaken as this being. We want to be this. And we've shown this slide many times. It's available on our site. And we've talked about mindfulness and diagnosis and analysis and meditation. And then, of course, synthesis, catharsis, liberation, and gnosis. It's 7 steps. We've covered most of them already. The synthesis that happens in meditation comes with time. You can't want it. You can't desire it. If you desire it, if you're waiting for it, if you're expecting it, you won't get it. The catharsis and the liberation happens by virtue of our Divine Mother. She can eliminate any previously comprehended ego, and the liberation of the consciousness that was bottled up inside of that ego. And if we do this process in conjunction with pranayama, in conjunction with sexual alchemy, we will be creating our golden bodies, our solar bodies, and eliminating the ego. And in fact, that's the process of alchemy. The transmutation, the transformation of the lead of the ego into the gold of the human soul. The lunar self into the solar self. So both of these things have to take place simultaneously. So you cannot master your mind. You will never be a master of your mind if you don't create the solar bodies and if you don't eliminate egos. If you practice pranayama and sexual alchemy without the elimination of ego, you will awaken the mind, the lunar mind. You will make it awake, but it won't be a solar mind. It will be a lunar mind, awakened lunar mind. That will be the mind of a black magician. It'll be a mind of a demon. Again, this process is also taught in revolutionary psychology by Master Sema and Bayor. It's, in many ways, this is what Carl Jung talks about when he talks about the integration of the shadow self and making the subconscious conscious. Because again, coming back to the previous slide where we were at, where we talked about what the nature of consciousness. Yeah. Hang on a second. We got to get our pointer on here. No, we got to turn it back to a pointer, I guess. All right. We're going to go back to this slide here. Oh, that wasn't. Wouldn't you know it? We just did this today, so you'll forgive us if we can't remember exactly where they are. It's getting late. Okay, so it must be here. Yeah, okay. All right, we're going to put this slide back on the screen. This is our state. And we are, you see, in a lunar state, we're dealing with a subconsciousness. The subconscious feeds the mind. The egos bottle it up, and most of what we get in our mind comes from the subconsciousness. We have very little free consciousness to work with. So the process of awakening has to be, that's what it means to be asleep. The process of awakening has to be ego death, the reduction of the influence on their egos. It has to be making this shift and transforming from lunar subconsciousness to solar consciousness. Only then can we be said to be awake. Because now the relationship between the mind and the consciousness is solar. The mind will be in a less reactive phase, in a much more responsive phase. Why? Because it will be under the command of the human soul and the monad, the consciousness. The consciousness will be able to project onto the mind with greater clarity and greater consistency and reliability when the mind is not being agitated constantly by the egos and the projections out of the subconscious. Right? So this is why meditation is so important and so good for quieting the mind, and why that psychological judo that we practice and transformation of impressions is important. Because if we don't, if the impressions are being digested in the subconsciousness, then we're just feeding the subconscious, and we're just feeding the egos, and we're giving the egos more energy with which to infect us and become parasites. So another way to think about this in the transformation of impressions, it's like you have egos are like a tapeworm in your intestines. If you don't have healthy probiotics, if you don't have a healthy digestion, if you don't chew your food and digest it properly in the stomach, then you're just feeding the tapeworm that's slowly killing you in your digestive tract. But if you can digest it properly, then you can extract some of the energy and some of the nutrients, right, before the tapeworm gets to it. So you can starve the tapeworm to death if you chew your food and digest your food properly. It's a crude analogy, but it's apt when we talk about consciousness and mind and subconsciousness. Mastering the mind is about this alignment. This is how you master the mind. The mind cannot master the mind. One who's possessed and enslaved by mind cannot be a master of the mind. So you can forget 99% of all self-help books, especially all the secular ones. You can throw them all in the garbage. You can throw them on the pile and light the fire. Seriously. I'm not normally one to advocate the burning of books, but if it's bullshit, it needs to be burned. Because those books are not helping anybody. They're making them think that they're becoming masters of their mind. But they're just enslaving themselves to another department of the mind. Because the mind is compartmentalized. It has different agencies. It has different departments doing different things, wanting different things under the guidance of different egos. Only the monad, only the true self, only the consciousness can be a master of the mind. Your true self can be a master of the mind. Your false self cannot master the mind unless they become a dark master, a master of darkness, a master of the left-hand path. But then guess what? It's your mind who is the master, and it's your consciousness, your true self, who is the slave. This fact is the greatest hindrance, and the fact that this humanity and 97 to 99% of the people cannot and will not accept this truth, that their mind is their adversary right now. It's not their friend, it's their adversary. It is the adversary. This is the greatest hurdle for this humanity, because it's relying, it's allowed the fox to guard the hen house. All of its knowledge, all of its so-called truths and my truths and all that nonsense and all that bullshit. And these even got to the point that postmodernists will convince you that there is no such thing as truth. It's all subjective. That's how enslaved to the mind this humanity is. But now, at least, we hope, we've given you, we've planted a seed and we've given you an overview on what you can do to escape that enslavement and one day, hopefully, awaken and become a master of your mind. If anyone has any questions, we have a few minutes left. Otherwise, we'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Anyone have any questions or final comments? No? Anyone? All right. Well, as always, this will be online, and this will be online on both Facebook and YouTube, and we will add it to our Attlas videos playlist and our Attlas Live Archives playlist, where you can find all of our previous live streams. We thank all of you for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you again soon. And if you found this useful and if you found this beneficial, then please share it. If you've noticed, the slides that we did today, we put quite a lot of effort into them. That's because we're hoping to utilize some of them in some shorter length videos, which will be easier for you to share on Facebook and with others whom you think should be introduced to this material, at least on a basic level. We want to be able to create tools like that for you to be able to share with others, because we recognize a 3-hour live stream may be a bit much for most people. Okay, so thank you very much. And you're very welcome, Eric. And we hope to see you all again soon. Okay, good night, everyone.